As ministry leaders, regardless of gender, age, or stage in life, we all need to be connected to meaningful community that helps us develop and resources us to lead effectively. In this episode, I'm joined by Jo Saxton. Jo is an author, speaker, a podcast host, and a leadership coach. She has led ministries and nonprofits and has pastored and planted churches. In a spirit of generosity, hope, and respect, Jo shares opportunities that we have as the church to help women and the next generation live into their God-given potential. Jo and I also look at ways that every ministry leader can experience healthy relationships that help us overcome past wounds and feelings of loneliness. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, friends, and welcome to another insightful episode of FrontStage BackStage. I am your host, Jason Daye, and every single week I have the honor of sitting down with a trusted ministry leader, and we dive into a topic to help you and other ministry leaders like you really embrace a healthy, sustainable rhythm in both life and ministry, both on the front stage, the more public part of our lives, and the backstage, the personal, private side of our lives. And we do more than just have a conversation. We also provide an entire toolkit that complements the topic we discuss, that helps you and the ministry team at your local church dive more deeply into this topic. And you can find that toolkit with all the tools and resources at pastorserve.org/network. There you'll find the resources along with a ministry leader's growth guide with questions for reflection, just to, again, dig more deeply into the topic at hand. Now, it is a privilege and a blessing to be a part of the Pastor Serve Network. And if you are a pastor or a ministry leader, one of our coaches would love to offer you a free coaching session. If there's someone that you just want to talk to, have an opportunity to just share some of the things that are going on in your life, in your ministry, well, we encourage you to avail yourself of this opportunity. Again, it's a completely free, a complimentary coaching session, and you can find that at pastorserve.org/free session. So be sure to check that out. Now, if you're joining us on YouTube, we'd love to see you with us. Give us a thumbs up. And in the comments below, if you'll just take a moment to drop your name and the name of your church, we'd love to get to know our audience better, and we'll be praying for you and your ministry. And whether you're following us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, please be sure to subscribe or to follow so you do not miss out on any of these great conversations. And we do indeed have a very important and very insightful conversation for you today. And at this time, I'd like to welcome Jo Saxton to FrontStage BackStage. Jo, welcome.
Hi, good to see you.
Yes, so good to have you with us. Thank you for making time to hang out with us. Now, Jo, you spent much of your ministry really helping women flourish as leaders. This is something that you're passionate about. This is something that you've personally lived, obviously, as a ministry leader yourself. But you've really invested a lot of time into this conversation, invested a lot of time into relationships around this. And I'm just curious, what are some of the shifts that you have seen over the years related to women in ministry leadership?
Shifts is a really good way of putting it. I think I would say it feels more like cycles than shifts. I think there are seasons where it seems that there are lots of women coming through and lots of opportunities, but it has an ebb and a flow to it, and then a quieter season where the challenges present themselves with a new face every era. I think that would be my honest answer. I would say, however, the past few years with the pandemic and the joy of the 2020s in all its myriad ways has compounded things, intensified things for women in leadership in distinct ways. Not to say that worse, but distinct ways. So I would say there's obviously a growing awareness and longing for women in leadership. And there have been eras where people have said it's a justice issue, but more often than not, people say it's a theological one, to be honest. It's a theological reflection. I think the added nuance in the recent era has been the rise of Me Too.
Right.
And how that has impacted churches, and how that has the voices of some of the women who have shared their devastating stories were women who were emerging into leadership and then derailed. So I think hearing that aspect of it has been has been a shift in recent years. And I think a growing sense of, okay, women are called, how do we best equip them? I think those would be the two, in some ways, the extremes. Well, actually, the Me Too one is more of an extreme, a devastating extreme. But those would be the particular things in the past couple of years that I would say have been louder and louder and louder.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And one of the things you mentioned there, Jo, was the kind of the distinction between it being a justice issue and being kind of a theological issue. Can you dig in a little more on that and kind of the nuances between approaching it in those two different ways?
Yeah, and in some ways, it feels a bit like splitting hairs when I say that, because it's not like theology and justice are separate.
Right.
I think sometimes. So maybe justice is the wrong word. Maybe almost like a current culture, like people say, "Well, catch up," or "Come on, it's 2022." And I think that, don't get me wrong, I think they're valid things to say, and I think there has been justice issues as part of it. And God's heart for justice is undeniable. I guess my point that I was making, probably weakly, was the sense of the wider conversations are actually, I'm not asking you to do this because it's not fair. I'm not asking you to acknowledge women because, oh, you've left people out and it's really naughty the way you've done that. Or it's time to right some wrongs. Although it is, and generally overdue. Wherever in culture, when it's time to right some wrongs, it's normally a bit late. It's just how humanity tends to work, sadly. But I think it's the louder voices I'm hearing alongside those would be, actually, when we look at the arc of scripture and we see what women were actually doing, would those women be received today? And if not, why not? And if we see women in the Bible living into the fullness of their God-given identity, and they are business leaders, and they are pastors, and they are church planters, and they are judges, and that, are we investing in image bearers so that they are free to live into the fullness of that calling and join in what God is doing in the world?
Yeah, that's good.
And so that it's not like, oh, let's do this because, oh, it's time, guys, it's time, or let's be sensitive, but let's recognize the arc of scripture and that we are simply responding.
Yeah, no, that's helpful because culture responds in different ways. Just kind of on its own, as we understand, right? Yeah. Culture does what culture does. But whenever we tie it back to kind of the biblical account, like you said, the arc of the story of Scripture, right? That's when we, within the church, I mean, this is our calling specifically, and how do we lean into that? How do we help celebrate those things that God obviously celebrated, in Scripture? And then how does that influence what we do on a daily basis? I would love for you to kind of detail, Jo, if you could, what some of the major hindrances are for women flourishing as leaders, specifically within the church that you've recognized.
Yeah, I'd say there are a number of areas. One, I think the stories that we tell about women in the Bible are often very limited ones. We might hear about Mary at Christmas, and rightly so, and Anna and Elizabeth. And that is often it. You might bring out a random woman on Mother's Day, and that's often someone who's not a mother. But do you know what I mean? They're mentioned. But when you think of the stories that are being told and you see yourself in the stories, are they hearing about Shira, who built 3 towns? She's in Chronicles. Are we hearing about Huldah, who was an advisor to kings? Are we hearing about Lydia as a businesswoman who's integrating her faith and her work? What are we hearing about Deborah? Are we hearing that that the legacy of 40 years and that she was a military strategist, a prophetess, and a judge? What do those stories, when they are not told, what impact do they have? I remember I was going to say doing deep research, but what I actually mean is on Instagram, writing a list of a number of women in the Bible. And I had people slide into my DMs and say, are they real? Did they really exist? Because they'd never heard of them before. And I said, yeah, they're real. And yeah, these are and I'd give them the references and stuff like that. And a number of women said they were angry because they had been denied hearing this story. She said, when everything around a woman's purpose is around childbearing or marriage, what happens if that's not part of her story? If her only contribution, now there are many significant men and women in the Bible, but what's definitive about them is the hand of God on their life, not their marital status, not whether they're having children. Now, there are women who are mentioned in the context, like Eunice and Lois, who are known as being a grandmother and a mother and raising up Timothy. So it's not that they're not there. And it's not like, oh, we shouldn't have those. I'm just saying have them all, because they're all there. They're different ethnicities, they're different marital status, they're different socioeconomic status, and all of them are defined by the hand of God moving in and through their lives for human flourishing in and through their communities. And so I think one of the tensions is when we don't hear the stories, what do we hear? And what happens when you're not, what's missing? Because it's hard to be what you can't see. That's what I think it was Marion Wright Edelman who said that. It's hard to be what you can't see. When these leaders, these women are influencing spaces and they don't recognize that they are following in the footsteps of a Deborah or a Shira or a David or a Joseph, it leaves an impact. And so sometimes that's one of the struggles. I think the other is other challenges for women leaders in the context of ministry is what the pipeline of their leadership development looks like. In terms of if you're the only woman in the room, or is someone going to mentor you? There are certain things you and I both know in the context of our mentoring and training. It's what's taught, but it's also what's caught. It's caught when you're hanging out with that leader. It's caught when you're watching that person, maybe on a trip, or you're invited into a meeting. Do the women in your community get invited into those spaces? And if not, why not? Now, there may be a theological reason as to why not. Maybe there are certain views that you have about what where women can be. But then for those of you for whom that's not the case, what are you doing actively to invest in these leaders to come into their own? This is delicate. And I think the honest truth about this subject is it's delicate. So, for example, a number of people will say, well, we do it for boundaries' sake. And we want to have healthy boundaries. And we want to honor the men and the women and the men in that situation. But honestly, when we look at the devastating stories that have happened in the past few years that have come to light, the women weren't the problem. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to say and the men were. I'm going to say those specific men who were abusing their power and who were abusing their privilege and abusing their reputation were the problem. And it didn't matter where that woman was. Because they manipulated and they deceived, and men and women, and they bullied and they took advantage of people. And so rather than shutting an entire opportunity for a woman to lead down, we're leaders who've had to be particularly creative in the past couple of years. Rather than say, okay, we can't do this, say, well, what are we going to do then? So are we going to do nothing? Because it does have an impact. If you cap someone's career because you're concerned about how it looks, or concerned about what it could develop, then don't cap their career. Create other environments. Send them on things. What about group training? Are there creative ways to ensure that? I don't think it has to be either or. I think healthy boundaries and healthy leadership development can exist for men and women. And it may require some different creativity. It may be a little harder. It may be a bit more awkward. It may be that the things that we're used to that leader doing, as would be with male leaders, we can cap male leaders because they're coming into their own, and that means it feels like a little less of the pie for us. There are all of those things are around, but it's still possible to have healthy boundaries and healthy development things. We've just got to think about it and it will look different for us in different churches and denominations. I respect that, but we do need to think about that. We can't just pretend it doesn't exist. Because it's understandable why we would cap opportunity if we've not seen those people develop. But what are we doing to develop them? You know what I mean? I think that's another issue. And then I think the staggering, overwhelming thing I've heard from women leading is the loneliness. The loneliness there's a loneliness that you can have in a crowd of people if you feel misunderstood. If you feel like you don't know whether you're welcome there. Or not whether you're welcome there, because generally people are welcome, but are they allowed to show up as fully as leaders there? Right. I think those are some. I mean, there are lots of challenges. There are lots of challenges in terms of pay equity and whether we're honest about that. I have seen again and again women not get paid for being given a different title when they've been doing the work of somebody else the same level as one of their professional peers. They don't resent that peer for getting what they're paid. It just doesn't make sense that they're not getting paid. You know, and
Right.
or when their pay is well, you're married and so your husband's supporting you. It's like, I'm not sure that's legal, and two, it's really not healthy to do those things. So and that's not to say every place does that at all, or every leader does that. But when, in response to your question, what are the things I hear from the women I talk to of different ages, different ethnicities, different stages around, those would be the common ones that keep coming back again: the loneliness, the leadership pipelines, the equity and how they're employed. Those are the growing edges that I think that we can explore in this time.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And Joe, I've got to tell you, I love the way that you kind of tackle this subject because you approach it with a sense of hope, one, and with a sense of really consideration, I think, for all parties involved, because you can come at topics like this, really like hot and heavy, like really like, hey, this is wrong, and just poking people in the eye and saying straighten up. But you come with an attitude of it's very heartfelt. It feels very gospel centered. The perspective you have, because you're saying, hey. I respect theological differences. I respect that this is challenging, but we're up for a challenge. But I mean, you're actually encouraging people like let's get creative, right? Let's think through this. Let's lead in this area as opposed to lagging behind.
Because I think at base level, let's say for our brothers and sisters here who are listening or watching, who are like, yeah, but I'm not sure women can do all of those things. That's fine, because it's not just men there are women who are like, no, this. As I look at the Bible, theologically, this is where I land. You still have to equip your leaders, though, because if you believe that those women, that the space where God is operating their calling is in the context of other women, well, those other women out there are still image bearers. They're still image bearers. They are still important. So therefore, you still have to sit down and think long and hard about how you will equip your leaders, not just to share the Bible, but to lead people. To lead people in their community, in other parts of the world. I would ask in those spaces that they would stay consistent, that they don't say women can own that, like the leaders that they send overseas, it's not a different ball game. You know, do you know what I mean? It's like, you can lead men over there, just not, you can lead men in another continent, just not on this one, because then that's not theological. Let's be clear. That's other things. But you see what I'm saying? It's like if it almost doesn't matter what your theological space is on that. I mean, obviously, do I believe that women can lead in all spaces? Yes, I do. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this. We know that. It's not like a spoiler alert or anything. It's just a fact. But what I'm saying is, if there's not a reason to not invest in your women who are leading. There's just not a reason.
Right.
And to do so in a way which they are empowered. Like I have spoken at events in churches where women have women's ministries of hundreds of women, 300, 400, 500. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people. Have we given them are we making sure that they know how to develop teams, run budgets, deal with conflict, deal with pastoral issues? Because that's a whole situation those leaders are doing there that are coming up in the daily warp and weft of their lives. So do you see what I'm saying on that front? So for me, I can't see any reason why we're not going to invest in them. Are they raising children? Well, that's a big thing. So have again, every kind of distinction I hear all brings me back to, so we really have to do this well then.
Right. Yeah. No,
we really
I love
have
that.
to do this well.
I love that, and I really appreciate that. Joe, all of us in ministry, we all have scars, right? That's just comes along with serving relationally, with other people. There are painful times. Scars come from wounds, and if wounds do not heal really in a healthy way, they can actually hinder us. What have you seen, or even maybe experienced yourself, that helps lead to healing wounds that, like we said, will come in a healthy way, rather than just what we oftentimes see, kind of dismissing the woundedness
Yeah.
or perhaps kind of suppressing, that those wounds even exist.
Yes. Well, thank you for asking me a question of which I've done all the things. So I have been, yeah. I think I understand why we would suppress the wounds. I would understand why, as leaders, men and women, why we suppress wounds. Sometimes we can default to thinking we've got to be strong for everybody else, and we've got to keep going. And we do that lie, which is the whole idea of sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me, kind of thing. And we pick up the child's nursery rhyme and we wear it like a badge of honor and break inside. And it's understandable because we want to keep going, we want to keep leading. But as you and I both know, and all of us know, that it's to our detriment, that avoidance doesn't actually avoid it. It just means it comes out sideways.
Mm.
And so what I have found, I found a number of key things that have helped me just stay on top of things. Depending, not every wound goes as deep as everything. It's been important for me to know what are the wounds that I'm particularly sensitive to. And when I say sensitive, not like, oh, she's got a sensitivity there. It's just they're vulnerable parts of your story.
Right.
They're vulnerable parts of your history, or they are particularly pressing moments that are happening in the world and culture right now that just hit differently. I need to be aware of those. I need people in my life to be aware of those, not because I'm not going to be able to avoid all of those. I'm not going to be able to avoid certain situations. But I need to be aware of them. So I think self-awareness is a great help for us in this as leaders. And that will include needing to admit that we are more vulnerable than we are comfortable with being. We are more vulnerable than the credit we get on a Sunday for our sermons will allow us. Do you know what I mean? All of those things.
Right.
And I would invite us to ask ourselves, what are our temptations? What are our vices? Always good to know those in advance. Do you know what I mean? Always good. Because you have an open wound and a vice hanging out, waiting for you. You have a whole problem on your hands, just waiting to happen, all happening in the dark.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Those are the things. And so I like to be proactive about my brokenness rather than wait until it breaks all over me. Because I've done that and that wasn't fun. So being aware of my vices, being aware of my vulnerabilities, and then it's the relationships I have. I have a prayer partner. We pray regularly throughout the week. I have a therapist because there are moments that actually I have wonderful key relationships who I talk with life, but there are certain things that don't work in the context of that in your friendship or your relationship,
right?
Because they're not a therapist. You know what I mean? They are your peer. They speak into your life. They challenge you. I'm vulnerable about it. Their accountability to me might be, have you spoken to somebody about it? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So there's still an openness about it, but the details of certain pieces are unpacked in the context of the therapist office, and that's just been helpful for me. In seasons of my life, there's been a spiritual director. I just believe in community. I believe our faith. God in his very nature is relational. In his very being is relational. And if we are imitating him, I do think there is some kind of relational dynamic. None of this Lone Ranger stuff, which was never in the Bible anyway, and is just Western culture. Mm-hmm. I think some of it is the environment that we're in, but also the environment we create around ourselves can help us in those things and help us process the brokenness. Because, if we get the gift of a long life, if we get the privilege of a long life, then, like you said, scars are an inevitable part of the journey. Disappointment is, and sometimes it's like we protect ourselves from the big things, but we don't attend to the kind of way that disappointment can grow in your life and bitterness can grow in your life. The ones that just are the drifts,
right.
The drifting, or the things that, like, with respect to women leaders, the erosive things of the things that have happened again and again and again and again, like the dripping, the drip feed things, the drip feed pains, the drip feed insults or minimizing and all these things. And then one day you have this huge reaction that you feel is like someone says something and it was a dumb thing to say, it was a stupid thing to say, but they didn't mean anywhere near the response that you had to it. And it's because that drip has been going on for the last 10 years. And now you're done.
Right.
And now you're done. And now that person is turned to ash by your words. So, so I think those are the things I'm particularly mindful in this chapter of our history, of our world, that we have to really pay attention to this. And we have to keep on, because tiredness, when you're just done, you're just done. It can be real. It can be real hard for us. Does that help?
Oh yeah, that's excellent. Very helpful. And one of the pieces that you talked about there, that idea of community, I think is so vitally important, and one that as leaders, sometimes we're not the best at at living in community, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned as a hindrance to women in ministry leadership is the loneliness.
Yeah.
And in ministry in general, regardless of gender, loneliness is a reality. So and then with women in ministry, that loneliness could even be compounded. So could you talk a little bit, Jo, about how do we practically, those of us in ministry, how do we practically overcome a sense of loneliness? What are some practices or things that we can do in our life that can help us experience some of that community that you talked about, and not let ourselves become lonely, or even worse, isolated? Because when we're isolated, a lot of bad things can happen, right? When we find ourselves in isolation. So what would you suggest?
I think this is such a crucial question, and you're right. I think there is my observation over the years has been that there has been an acceptable loneliness for leaders, that we have. You know what I mean? We've spiritualized it. Oh, well, you can't be on the same page as people around you. We've spiritualized distance. We've spiritualized isolation. Sometimes we didn't ask to put ourselves on pedestals. People put us on them, and we're like, I want to get down. I want to somebody let me down. They're like, no, you step there, pastor. So it's hard. And in time, and so I would encourage a couple of things. First of all, I think we need to set ourselves a goal. Like as you look to the year ahead, is it that you need to invest in one kind of retreat or event where you are with other pastors? We're praying and fasting into all kinds of things, and we often don't pray and fast into all the relationships in our life, even though they are so definitive. We might pray and fast into the spouse or something like that for a while, but to actually, I want to ask you, are you praying about the friends you're making? Jesus prayed all night about who he was going to invest in. He went up a mountain, came down, and picked him out. And it wouldn't hurt us to commit to prayer on one level. And I don't mean that glibly. I just think it's that desperate.
Right.
It's like, get your spiritual firepower in. So that's one thing. And then I want to ask you, what do you have to invest in financially to do this? And it feels weird to invest financially in relationships. And you know why? It's because when we went to school, we made best friends with people, and we don't know how much our parents spent on our shoes, our clothes, our everything, on the paperwork to get us into that school. Do you know what I mean? And then we went to college and all these things, and you became friends with the people who you had an interest with, or were just sat next to you. And so we are used to somehow it just happening, but it doesn't just happen. Somebody else makes it happen. Right. And now, because we're grown, that someone else is you. So, you know what I mean? Now we're grown and someone else is you. So I want you to think of financially what you need to invest in. Do you need to join? Like for some of us, you probably have spent enough time with other believers, real talk. And you might need to find some peers outside. So is it an affinity, an activity that you're really into where you can connect with some people and begin to build relationships? Or is it an event or a leaders event or something that you can go to where you are not the only one who's like you, where all the aliens are welcome? Do you know what I mean? All the unicorns are welcome. And I would encourage you to seek that out. And if you can put that into your budget, because the returns on this kind of investment can be years. Be years. Right. Like you said, Jason, about the cost of isolation is so great. It's so great. And we hear these devastating stories of these leaders who had no one to talk to and felt that there were no other options and stuff, and and made devastating choices. And we were like, actually, I would rather find the money. Do you know what I mean? I would rather who in those, because by the time you're that isolated, you're not able to say, well, what I need is this, that, and the other. It's so desperate. I don't know if you ever, where you felt you have no other choice. You felt you had no other choices than the decisions that you make in that moment. And they didn't even feel like decisions. And so what I'm suggesting is not what we do then, but what we do way, way before then. And if there are some internal reasons, for some of us, we don't make friends with people because friends have been mean. Do you know what I mean? Some of our church scars, our ministry scars, that person stepped on you on the ladder on their way up to their job and everything. So you don't make friends with ministry people now. It's like you keep your enemies at your distance. You just call them other brothers in Christ or something. And that, but because you've been scarred. And if that's the case, then there is a healing work alongside it, because otherwise you'll meet all these great people and you'll be like, nope, not doing that, not going near them. They're weirdos. And some people are weirdos, but that doesn't mean they can't be your friends. But do you know what I mean? If you need some
Yes.
healing work, consider that. And then I want you to give yourself time. Like, I have a friend in the corporate space, and she's a really good friend of mine. We go for walks regularly, and we say it's saved our family's lives that we go on these walks. But she has this thing where she sets aside an amount of time every week to building relationships, building professional relationships, and she builds networks, she builds friendships. Some people are people she's just helping out with jobs. Some people become peers. But I was really humbled by just that illustration. She's in the C-suite. She's a busy woman. She's a busy woman. Her husband is working as well. She's got 3 kids, her very active life. And somehow in the scheme of her work, and she's a volunteer at church. So this girl does busy. But somehow in the midst of her time, she's thought, yeah, but relationships are so important that I need to give a percentage of my time just for that, even if I don't know what the return is going to be immediately. And so I want to invite each one of us as leaders, do we need to say for 15 minutes once a week or an hour once a week, I'm going to send a couple of texts out, I'm going to email someone, I'm going to encourage somebody, I'm going to build, do you know what I mean? I'm going to contact the other pastor in our city and say, hey, we've got to get a coffee sometime. We've been saying that for about a year. Let's get on our calendars or something, because we have to make this physical. And I think you have to do it as a discipline until it becomes a habit, until it becomes a rhythm, until it becomes your life. Do you know what I mean? So right now, it's just going to feel clunky and awkward. And you're going to feel like you're saying, somebody be my friend. And you kind of are. You kind of are. But rest assured, if we're talking about these sorts of things on podcast, it means because we're all feeling like this.
Right.
So I want to ask you, what does it mean for you to set aside time to connect? And I would say, let's start easy. So if you're a youth pastor, who are the other youth pastors in your neighborhood? Do they know you? Do you know them? Or are we all still busy competing like there isn't a big enough thing out there? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like sometimes they become the competition. I'm like, have you looked at the world around you recently? There are millions of people, plenty to go around, plenty, friends. So, okay, let's not do that anymore. Or at least if we feel those feelings, just ignore them for a second while you make the call. And if you're a children's pastor, you know what I mean? That, connect in that way. If you are, so it might be about the job you do. If you're like, I just don't know where to start with the job that you have, and start in the area that you're in, and just say, I'd love to connect, and that just wanting to and you, not everybody's got time. So again, I have to say this: please don't go searching for your one friend. Do you know what I mean? Let's not be weird about this, folks. Don't go searching for the one friend. You might have to contact like 5 people, and you might get 1 call back. That's okay. Yeah. But we've just got to get doing it. We have to. And I want to be as granular and as specific as this, because I think we get really wafty about it. Like, oh, you know what I mean? Oh Lord, bring someone in. I'm like, do you say that? This ain't Target. This ain't Amazon Prime. You've got to go and get it. Do you know what I mean? You're like, Lord, are you going to bring someone into my life? I'm like, or are you going to go like you're grown? Again, it's like, you're grown. We send our kids to school and we tell them to go and make friends. And then we're asking God to divinely drop someone in our backyard. That's weird. That's weird. And we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't do that anymore. And I know it's hard. And I know I think it's hard because the return on the investment is worth it. I think it's hard because it's just hard and we're used to being isolated, and maybe maybe some of us have got a little into the pedestal. It's convenient. And we're taking it back to the thing we said earlier about the self-awareness thing. Maybe we're like, okay, have you begun to believe you're impressed a little bit?
Right.
Have you? Do you think you're a little bit of a special flower? And yes, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. No doubt about it. Go make a friend.
Yeah, exactly.
Still got to go make a friend, people. Yeah, and I think there are when it's been a long time as well. There's so much backup. Like there's so much in our stories that we're like, I don't know where to start, and it's okay. It makes it. But we just got to get on the journey. And so that's what I would encourage us to begin to think about. And then maybe invite someone in our life to hold us accountable about doing. I think we've just got to do it.
Yeah, I love that, Jo. I love the intentionality of it. And it does feel kind of odd, you know what I mean? It takes us back to, to middle school or whatever, junior high, like going to the new school and hoping to make a friend, but the intentionality of understanding that relationships are so vitally important in our lives. God created us to be not only in relationship with him, but in relationship with others. And so if it is that important, then then we do need to make space and time
Yeah.
and be intentional about how are we cultivating healthy
Yeah.
relationships, right? So I
Absolutely.
love that. It's a great piece. It's been great conversation. As we're closing down, I do want to ask one thing, if you could kind of share with us, because you also you have a heart for the next generation of leaders, and one thing that I would love for you to kind of leave us with in this conversation are just some thoughts about how we as pastors, as ministry leaders, can really invest in the next generation of leaders and really provide them with an avenue to live fully into all that God has for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a point when we realize that it can't just be about us and our achievement. And again, I think some of this is when we look at the life of Jesus, when we look at the leader that he was, and we recognize that he's the best leader that ever lived and everything, and we see how he did it. He gathered people around him. He poured his life into them. He gave them opportunities to practice things and fail, and he talked them through it. He taught them, he healed them, he came alongside them, and then he commissioned them. And there was an ongoing, like, mini commissions along the way, wasn't there? He sends out the 12, he sends out the 72. You know what I mean? They see him pray, they see you know, his closest friends see him real vulnerable. That he gives them some access to his life. So I think, again, it's that thing I was saying earlier when we were talking about women leaders. There is a lot about leadership that is caught, that happens when people are watching you lead other people. You know, when we think of our heroes, the people who've been in our lives, we don't remember everything they've said, but we remember who they were. We
Right.
remembered how they treated people, what they did, and stuff. And that takes some access and proximity. And so if we're going to raise up other leaders, then we need to give somebody's got to have access and proximity to our story, yes, but also to some of our time and some of our life. And who, you know, oh my goodness, where would I have been if I had no one to process my failures with? I would have lived under condemnation, or been like addicted to overachievement for years just to make up for the mistakes I've made.
Mm.
Whereas to have a chance to talk through failure with someone and to have that wobbly vulnerability of trying to build up again has been crucial. So I think I would ask again, I'd say go away and pray about who you're meant to invest in, and think of and assume it's your job. Do you know what I mean? It's not like if this is right, it's a when.
Right.
It's a when. And I get in the seasons of our life, we may be taking care of parents, we may be dealing with other, do you know what I mean? That we can't do everything to the same degree all the time. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes we don't have to give everything to the same degree all the time. It's like maybe it's just one phone call.
Right.
Maybe someone's like, you know, I'm applying for a job. What do I negotiate? There is a wealth of things that you can offer, whether it's the information you know, and with respect to women leaders, the information you guys know is a lot. The things that you take for granted of knowing because you're in the room, start sharing it with the people who weren't in the room. That will do a lot for the next generation of leaders. That will do a huge amount. But opportunities, and you know, the thing, Jason, I must confess, when I was growing up, I heard a lot about how we handled money and like how we interacted with people of the opposite sex. Didn't hear much about power. Didn't hear much in terms of the corrosive nature of power, the seductive nature of power, and how to share power, how to surrender power, how to not be afraid. Do you know what I mean? All of those sorts of things.
Right.
And I think we have to reckon with some of that, because I think some of our difficulty is because we're hoarding power.
Mm.
And it's comfortable, or we just don't know what we don't know about about all of that stuff. You know, and so I want to encourage us, and you know, if you've got a lot of resources in your environment, not all of us have a lot of resources, so we have to think about that. If we've got a lot of resources, then what vehicles can you create in your space for the next set of leaders to come through? For those of you who like, I've got little, I ain't got anything to give, you'd be surprised. Let people ask you questions, and all your unconscious competence will start pouring out, and it's worth more than you realize.
That's awesome. I love that. Jo, it's been so great to have you with us. I know that you do a lot. You write, you have communities, you do a lot of speaking. If our audience would like to connect with you, learn more about your ministry, the things that you're doing, your podcast, all those things, what's the best way for them to connect?
I think your first port of call would be my website, josaxton.com, and because you'll see the books there, you'll see Aza Collective, which is my intensive for women leaders, my coaching community, and you'll see the lineup of things, a podcast story, and you can pick what you like. And then on the social media platforms, at Jo Saxton.
Perfect.
I'm hovering around various spots.
Nice. Excellent. And for those of you who are watching along, listening in, we will have links to Jo's website, her resources, her social links it'll be in the toolkit for this conversation at pastorserve.org/network. So, Jo, thank you again so much for making time to hang out with us. Thank you for sharing your experiences, what you're seeing, and just again, I just love your, not just your perspective, but kind of the hope and the kind of respect and just the nature of how you approach these topics is super encouraging. It's kingdom stuff, sister, and I absolutely love it. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. God bless you. Now, before you go, I want to remind you of an incredible free resource that our team puts together every single week to help you and your team dig more deeply and maximize the conversation that we just had. This is the weekly toolkit that we provide, and we understand that it's one thing to listen or watch an episode, but it's something entirely different to actually take what you've heard, what you've watched, what you've seen, and apply it to your life and to your ministry. You see, FrontStage BackStage is more than just a podcast or YouTube show about ministry leadership. We are a complete resource to help train you and your entire ministry team as you seek to grow and develop in life and ministry. Every single week, we provide a weekly toolkit, which has all types of tools in it to help you do just that. Now, you can find this at pastorserve.org/network. That's pastorserve.org/network. And there you'll find all of our shows, all of our episodes, and all of our weekly toolkits. Now, inside the toolkit are several tools, including video links and audio links for you to share with your team. There are resource links about different resources and tools that were mentioned in the conversation, several other tools, but the greatest thing is the Ministry Leaders Growth Guide. Our team pulls key insights and concepts from every conversation with our amazing guests. And then we also create engaging questions for you and your team to consider and process, providing space for you to reflect on how that episode's topic relates to your unique context at your local church, in your ministry, and in your life. Now, you can use these questions in your regular staff meetings to guide your conversation as you invest in the growth of your ministry leaders. You can find the weekly toolkit at pastorserve.org/network. We encourage you to check out that free resource. Until next time, I'm Jason Daye, encouraging you to love well, live well, and lead well. God bless.